What is the future of our democracy? My guest this week, retired Assistant Attorney Phillip Halpern, had a 36-year career in the U.S. Justice Department. He resigned on September 30th, 2020, because he was so dismayed by continued actions of the Attorney General that demonstrated disregard for law and favoritism or cover-ups of potential criminal behavior by the president and his friends. In this episode of Hey Boomer, we talk about voting rights, First Amendment rights, and social media. And we talk about what actions people like you and I can take to protect our democracy. This is a fascinating and important discussion. My name is Wendy Green, and I am your host of Hey Boomer. Hello, Hey Boomer listeners. I have to tell you, tomorrow is a big day for me. April 13th, a year ago, I had the first Hey Boomer Live show. I think I had 4 guests, and my mother was probably one of them. But we now reach over 3,000 people weekly combined between the live show, the recorded shows, the streams out onto the podcast channels, which is absolutely amazing, exciting, and so much of that is thanks to all of you that participate and join us each week on the show. And I have confidence that my goal of creating this motivational mecca for boomers and beyond is absolutely going to come to fruition. So celebrate with me. Tomorrow is Hey Boomer anniversary. I want to take a moment also to thank a couple of our sponsors who are helping to make the forest bathing event possible, the event that we're holding on May the 4th. Our first sponsors are June Green and Don Blumenthal, and they are sponsoring in support of Alzheimer's caregiver support groups. And here's what they have to say. One of the kindest things you can do for someone who is hurting is listen when they care to share. Then offer to do something specific, like make a meal or do a specific errand. Family members, husbands, wives, or adult children who are caring for a loved one who has Alzheimer's disease need to know they are not alone. Alzheimer caregiver support groups bring people together who, like themselves, are doing their best to cope with the stress of caregiving. And they can learn from each other and feel supported, and yes, realize that they are not alone. If you would like more information or to find a caregiver support group near you, you can call the 24/7 Alzheimer's hotline at 800-272-3900. I also want to tell you about our second forest bathing sponsor, and his name is Drew Morgan. And Drew is the founder of Mental Coach Morgan. He coaches individuals to master their mindset, strive to be the best version of themselves, and find joy along the way. Drew is a certified mental performance consultant, a professor of sports psychology to graduate level students, and he has thousands of hours worth of experience coaching Fortune 500 leaders, professional athletes, musicians, and those simply looking to get a foothold on life. Drew says the world is an increasingly difficult place to navigate with a multitude of pressures an overwhelming amount of information and distractions everywhere. His goal is to help clients sort through the clutter, identify what is important to them, and learn how to manage their own psychology to find joy, peace, and success. If you are interested in learning more about Drew or to schedule a free 30-minute consultation, you can find him at mentalcoachmorgan.com, or you can email him directly at drew@mentalcoachmorgan.com. So thanks for that. And speaking of the forest bathing event, you all know it's on May 4th from 12:30 to 3:30. It's at the Foothills Equestrian Nature Center in Tryon, North Carolina. And we are collecting all kinds of cool stuff for your swag bag. So there's a few spots left. If you are interested in joining us, you can sign up from the Facebook page. The forest bathing event is posted at the top of the Facebook page. And finally, I send out a Monday morning reminder email. So if y'all have wanted to watch this show and you've had trouble finding it or whatever on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, you can just drop me an email and say, please add me to the email list, and I will be sure to get you out that email, and then you can find the show easily. Okay, thank you for the comments. I see a few people saying congratulations. Thank you all. Yes, it's pretty exciting to have a year behind us in this Hey Boomer and looking out to more years to come. So I'm ready to bring Phil on. So Phil was sworn in as the Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of California on October 1st, 1984. And he served the office in various capacities until he resigned on September 30th, 2020. Over the course of his 36-year career with the Justice Department, Phil has successfully prosecuted some high-profile cases, including the U.S. versus Randy Duke Cunningham, the largest corruption case ever brought against a sitting U.S. congressman, and the U.S. versus Duncan D. Hunter et al., one of the successful campaign finance cases he brought against sitting U.S. congressmen. Phil has served in 6 administrations and under 19 U.S. Attorney Generals. He is married to Marcia Halpern, and they have 3 sons. He is also a competitive cyclist and runs a sub-240 marathon. Goodness gracious. So hi, Phil.
Well, hi, Wendy. Thanks so much for having me here. And it's great to be part of your anniversary show.
I know. That's so exciting. Thank you. So let's start with the basics, Phil. I mean, we all hear about the, Attorney General and the Assistant Attorney General and all of the stuff that goes on. But tell me, just so for a starting point, what does an assistant U.S. attorney do, and how has that changed for you over the 36 years you were with the Justice Department?
Well, everybody knows the criminal justice system, perhaps from Law and Order, and sees what happens when people commit regular crimes. But they might not know there's an entire system overlaid over that called the federal system. And there's a separate set of crimes that the feds have jurisdiction over. Over the last 80 years, that's kind of mushroomed, so that now the feds seemingly have jurisdiction over just about every single crime there is. So the real question becomes, what do we prosecute? And like the old saying goes, do you want to make a federal case out of it? Right. By that, we mean only the biggest crimes, the ones that aren't just local in nature, that perhaps involve crossing state lines, crossing international lines and boundaries. So we handle the biggest crimes that we think perhaps the local police can't handle.
So, and also political crimes, like you missed some of the introduction because you were getting your camera back, but I talked about, the congressman that you prosecuted. So
Well, absolutely. That's clearly part of it. And historically, political crimes have gone to the federal system because of fear that the local prosecutors wouldn't do that. That started in the 60s when there were local sheriffs, perhaps, who wouldn't be picked on, who were committing civil rights violations against people, as well as local mayors who were corrupt, but they had everybody in the town in their pocket. So the feds would come in, often from Washington. They would helicopter in and handle the suit. Since then, we've established corruption units pretty much in every major office in the country. And so I'm out here in San Diego, and typically most of my cases have some nexus to San Diego. And I've specialized for the last 20, 25 years in political corruption cases, among other white collar crimes.
Okay. All right. And so you've served under both Democratic and Republican administrations.
Yes. I mean, that's an important point, I think, because one of the reasons that I've remained in the Department of Justice for so long is because I've been proud of its work. And it doesn't matter to most of the, in fact, it doesn't matter to any of the career prosecutors, if it's a Republican or if it's a Democrat running the show. And I think a lot of your listeners should take great heart in that. We care about what we do, and we prosecute the cases that come before us. And sure, I might have my own political leanings, but we check those at the door. And that's one of the great things about the Department of Justice and the people who are in it. When Donald Trump was railing against the deep state, I personally took that as a compliment. You know, it's like, yeah, we're the people here who are representing the American people. We're not representing you. And the oath that every single career prosecutor takes is to the Constitution of the United States. It's not to Donald Trump. It's not to a Republican president or a Democratic president. And I think that is truly one of the great strengths of our country and something that does differentiate, you know, America from many other countries abroad.
Yeah, and that's interesting. But I'm wondering that, you know, with the different administrations, did you feel the slant of what you prosecuted was different depending on the administration, or is that just more recent?
No, it really isn't more recent. I think, like everything under the past administration, things accelerated, life accelerated, and norms continually were broken. But if we start out with the baseline, everybody has to understand, if they don't already, that elections have consequences, and they have consequences for every walk of life. And in the Department of Justice, different administrations came in and imposed their priorities. And that's okay. I mean, it's when George Bush came in and made it his priority to crack down on drugs in Southeast Florida and this, you know, southern part of the United States, that was his right. You know, when Bill Clinton came in and changed some of the priorities and decided he wanted to look at more corporate crime, that's right. There are separate and limited resources. There are finite resources that we have, and therefore every president gets to decide how they want those resources deployed. The real question then becomes, are they doing it fairly, and does it apply to all people equally? If it does, I might not like it, but I can kind of, I can hold my nose like everybody and make a decision, do I want to work there or not? I was very lucky because I didn't agree with the immigration policies or the drug policies of many past presidents. I think the ones under the Trump administration were particularly reprehensible, but I didn't agree with the way we were handling drugs under Barack Obama, or any of the prior presidents. I personally, thought that was a waste of our limited resources. We'd be much better off going after corporate crime than a lot of the smaller drug cases that our office did. Similarly with immigration, I think there's better and smarter ways to do it. But I also recognize those priorities came down from the top. And I had a couple of choices. One was to do those type of cases or leave. Now, fortunately for me, because of my seniority in the office and where I was doing white collar crime. So I could kind of look the other way when that happened. But that is a reality. And one of the changes, although we haven't made all the changes I would like to see, but in the southern border, any of the borders, we were arresting every single person that came into the United States and charging them with a felony. And that can bog down the system. You know, and
Wow.
when I say a
Yeah.
felony, when it was warranted, sometimes only a misdemeanor is warranted for a first-time person who just enters the United States, but we were charging them criminally. Where historically in the past, if a person was coming in looking for work, they hadn't committed any crimes at all, we would simply return them to the country of origin, and we wouldn't prosecute them. Now, if we are prosecuting more of these people, we're prosecuting less of other people. There's a
Mhm.
trade-off, and we as a country have to make those decisions. And those decisions are done in Washington by the president and the attorney general.
Okay. So on September 30th last year, you resigned.
Mhm.
What was the final straw after 36 years of getting through all these different priorities and administrations? What was that final straw that made you resign?
Well, I've just made it clear that is the right of the president and the attorney general to decide in general on what policies they should pursue. I believe that. That's always how it is. But one thing that we can have in the Department of Justice, and that is the attorney general and the president using the department for their own personal gain, and enrichment politically. We can't have the Department of Justice targeting people criminally. Similarly, we can't have the Department of Justice letting people go in order to aid, the president or other members of the government. And that's what happened. And it happened repeatedly. And I saw that the Attorney General of the United States, much to my horror, was representing not the American people, but he was representing far too often the President of the United States. We saw that, for example, in the Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, the Roger Stone cases, with the Attorney General selectively meddling individuals. In the case of Michael Flynn, who pled guilty, he was letting them out, reversing those, or asking the Department of Justice to give special leniency in sentencing these people. And he was doing so, and I think every single prosecutor recognized that in order to aid him, because these people were his people. And when we look at the crimes that were being committed by these people, they were all crimes involving his campaign and covering up potential criminal activity of the president. When we allow this to happen, we are slipping into an autocracy, a dictatorship. This is how government works in Russia and China. Make no mistake about it. If you're related to the leadership of those countries, if you're Vladimir Putin's friend, you're not getting indicted. He's taking care of you. And when I saw that happening here, and I saw it in many different ways we can talk about, it was too much for me. I did not want to be a part of a system like that, and I felt it was necessary to make a statement. And that's not a statement that was easy for me to make. I
I
mean,
bet. Yeah, I
yeah, I
bet.
mean, this is a place that I've loved. I really do like the Department of Justice. I respect the work that's done here because over my career, I've seen how the people who are part of it, are so dedicated and committed. Some of the best attorneys in the country who work for so much less than they would otherwise make because they believe in their mission. And when that mission was being distorted by an attorney general, who was acting corruptly, in favor of the president, it really, was beyond the pale. And even
I
thinking back now to what he was doing in terms of the voting, controversy. Now, again, trying perhaps to preserve his reputation, he came around in the very end after it was all over. But in the beginning, he was changing the way that the DOJ had historically looked at these cases. And he was doing so in order to allow individual U.S. attorneys who were political appointments to announce and initiate on their own investigations into campaign finance fraud and voting irregularity. Now, that might not sound like a big deal to many of your listeners, but believe me, it is. There are checks and balances in order to make sure that we don't actually tilt an election by announcing an investigation and letting the public learn of it when actually we may not be sure what's happening. And we even saw that there were allegations during the campaign about how votes were being destroyed. The post office was throwing away ballots. And when we looked into it, we found no, that wasn't actually what happened. They were misplaced, but yet it came out, and it came out in Pennsylvania, allowing the people there to say, whoa, there's voter fraud here. You need to watch out about it. We know, because we saw what happened in the courts, all of those claims evaporated.
Right.
But it was allowing the prosecutors even to talk about these in the beginning that was so distasteful to me, because it turned our policy on its ear. And this is what I couldn't stand about it. I couldn't have the Attorney General deciding to speak out about rioters in Portland. Now, that's okay. If he decides he's going to talk about all rioters, hey, we need to be careful, folks. But when he makes the decision to continually talk about the dangers of people in Portland who are protesting, most of the time peacefully, Black Lives Matters issues, and he highlights that. But yet at the same time, he says nothing when the Michigan state capitol is stormed by armed militia people. That's a problem, because that's selectively using the Department of Justice and our position to aid a particular political candidate. And that's something that every single American should be concerned about.
Yeah, and I can hear in your voice that it was just a series of things that kept happening, and I'm glad you brought up the voting, Phil, because I do want to talk about that a little bit. We see a lot of states now that are trying to allegedly implement laws that limit voting or restrict voting rights, and so I'm wondering, do you think, as a former prosecutor, that is something that can be upheld in courts? Because they're surely going to be questioned, right?
Yeah. Well, that's a complex question. So let me break it down just a little bit if I can. And if I miss some things, you can tease it out. Number one, I'm very pleased as a host of this show that you said allegedly, because I think that's appropriate. I'm the guest, and I'm telling you, it's not allegedly. You can look at the law. It's in reality. And we've seen now hundreds of bills being presented in 47 separate states to limit voting rights. And people try to defend that by saying, for example, we look at the Georgia law, and one of the points that's made by the people behind it and many conservative commentators is that, well, hold on. In some points, they're just standardizing hours. And in doing so and standardizing hours, say 9 to 5, they're actually increasing the voting hours in some jurisdictions. How can you say that's limiting people's rights? It's expanding it. And then when you go behind it, you understand, well, no. I mean, they may be limiting expanding the hours somewhat in a rural district, which doesn't need it, but yet they're cutting those hours 9 to 5 in places like Fulton County in Atlanta, where people work and they can't get off work. They have to go before work or they have to go after work. And then they're also limiting mail-in ballots so that people who want to vote that way because they are working can't do it. When you look at these laws, and the one in Georgia in particular, you can't come away with anything but saying this is a concerted effort by the people in Georgia to limit the ability of people in that state to vote. And that is reprehensible. It's anti-democratic. And frankly, I can say it because it's true. It's racist. That's all it is. It's trying to prevent people who, are of color as well as low-income people, who can't afford to vote at the right hours from casting their ballots. And the reason I'm so passionate about this is because it is a solution in search of a problem. Because the fact remains, and this is something that I know all too well, because this is what I've spent decades doing. There is no widespread voter fraud, period. There simply isn't. Even Bill Barr was forced to say that. Chris Wray, the director of the FBI, testified in front of Congress. There was no widespread voter fraud. We have had through several Republican administrations, the Department of Justice and independent commissions looking at voter frauds. And it simply doesn't exist in terms of any way that would sway an election. So there is no problem. And the conservatives are using it as a smokescreen. And what bothers me so much is that I basically believe the people in this country are good, as a whole, certainly majority. These are good, well-meaning people. I don't care. As I said, I work for Republicans and Democrats, and I don't care if you're a liberal or conservative. I think most people want to do the right thing and are good people. But the problem comes when people can't agree on what the facts are. When we have tens of millions of people believing that there was widespread voter fraud and that Donald Trump should have been elected, and make no mistake, like 30%, 30 to 50% of the Republican Party, depending on what polls you look at, still believe the election was stolen. That's a real problem because we can't have consensus and we can't move forward as a democracy if people can't agree on basic facts. And that is a fact that, I know many, many people I have to have this discussion with. In fact, last night I had this discussion over a dinner table, where I was talking to people, educated people. One of them was a very successful attorney who were convinced that there was voter fraud and we have to guard against it.
Even still convinced.
Even still.
Yeah. And that was going to be one of my questions to you. Like, how do we maintain our free society, a democracy, when so many people still think this election has been stolen?
Well, I am very troubled. I wrote an editorial after the January 6th riot, which the paper captioned 2020, the year democracy died, because it was my real concern that while it's still alive, it's on life support, is what I was saying. And the reasons for that are, they're not so complex, really. I don't think the people, have changed much, who make up the citizens of this country. But we have been subject over the last 20 years with several forces that we've never had to deal with before. One of those is the proliferation of cable news. That's a problem when we have networks who are designed and who have no problem issuing misinformation. Secondly, we have social media, which we've never had before. And we have individuals who run massive social media platforms, the largest ones and the largest corporations in the world, when you're looking at Facebook, Google, and YouTube, who turn a blind eye in the face of corporate profits, as well as arguing about free speech, that allow misinformation to proliferate. And it is very, very difficult now balancing the First Amendment rights. We may be able to take care of cable news, as we've seen. Fox, OAN, and Newsmax were all sued recently by Dominion. And the second voting company, billion-dollar lawsuits. And interestingly, they changed their tactics about arguing voter fraud. And what you see now is very, very different. And one of the reasons was because they were promoting, and these are the major hosts on these networks, and all the guests were promoting the fact that there was potential fraud because there were Dominion voting machines that were made by Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, and that they were able to switch votes. This is going out to tens of millions of people. And Dominion wrote a letter, the lawyers, to Fox and said, look, stop this. This isn't true. And the reason we know this isn't true is because we don't even have any of our voting machines in Georgia. They're simply not there.
Right.
Did that stop people on Fox from the false claim? It didn't. But then, after saying that, then Dominion sued. That stopped them. All of a sudden, the lawyers said, wow, we can't do this anymore. So there are some limits on cable news. But because of Section 230 of the Telecommunications Act, there are no such restrictions on Facebook and Google and YouTube. So Facebook is allowed to, post any lies they want. I could say that I know that the former president of the United States, made numerous false statements, but because he was the president, it was decided we will leave him on Twitter, we will leave him on Facebook. After he left office, he was removed at any rate from Twitter. But all types of false information proliferate in these platforms. And there is no liability because of Section 230 says the people who manage the platforms aren't responsible. So it's only some anonymous poster, if you can find out who it is, that gets tweeted or retweeted, whether it's QAnon or whoever. You can have people in the, if we look at QAnon as an example, and I think it's just a scary example, but to this day, any of your people, if they doubt this, they should recognize it by now. But if they don't, please go into Google and put in Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, child
Right.
trafficking rings and pizza, and they will see that there are there are hundreds of thousands of posts, involving this false claim that Hillary Clinton was running, a
Child
sex trafficking ring out of a pizzeria. And what's so sad, because it's all on the internet, people believe it.
So many do.
Millions of people believe it. Maybe none of your listeners, because they don't go, onto those sites and look for those types of things, but it's there. And that presents a very dire concern. And the question is, should you roll back some of the protections? And can you do so without unduly restricting free speech?
That's a
Because we have
tough
to
one.
worry about the ability of people who want to tell the truth and who want peaceful dissent. If somebody wants to say, if I want to get on Twitter and say Bill Barr, is a criminal who's representing the president of the United States and not the people of the United States, and he should be thrown out of office, I can do that.
But could you have done that as an assistant U.S. attorney? I don't think so.
Well, I would have lost my job.
Right.
But,
But there's such a fine line about what is free speech and what is not free speech.
Well, again, but there are certain obligations you have as a prosecutor. And there were, I know, because I was hanging out there alone for a long time. And it can get lonely. But there were two other prosecutors who eventually, who did make statements, but they were very mild statements, but they did express their disapproval. And as far as I know, nothing happened. They weren't reassigned. They didn't lose their jobs. So even the Department of Justice recognizes that there are limits. But again, you're in a little different position when you're a federal prosecutor, because we can't comment publicly unless
Right.
there are facts known to everybody on particular cases or people who should be charged. And that's one of the strengths of the Department of Justice. There are many, many cases where, I feel people are guilty of crimes, but if we can't indict them, we don't talk about it. Everybody's presumed innocence, and that's the way it should be. So there are restrictions on me. And if I want to do it, I have to make some decisions. Just like there were restrictions on Edward Snowden. And that is a very, difficult position. If you are in a position where you believe something unconstitutional is going on and you try to bring it up to your boss and, people say, forget about it, then you have a decision to make.
Yeah.
I've been in that position before. I investigated and indicted the executive director of the CIA, the person who was third in charge of the CIA. It was a fascinating case. And one of the things that I found most fascinating was I had to look at all the information that he had involving, the fraud that I was alleging. And a lot of what he was doing had to do with classified information. And there were things that I can't talk about to this day. And there are things I can talk about. For example, he was talking about the rendition program and some of the drone strikes. And while I won't give details about it because I don't want to get in trouble, at the time I was sitting there thinking, this is before it's public. This is the only reason I can say it is because it's public now. But I'm looking at things going, hold on, what? We're targeting people in other countries, to assassinate them, with no war declared. Is this right? What are we doing here? And I had a choice. Is this something that I wanted to go to the papers about and protest, or did I want to simply wait? Now, the decision was made easy because it became public shortly thereafter. But I have to say, I probably wouldn't have gone public because I made a deal. I signed something. I mean, it's not just the criminal charges, but we all face as people how far the lines are drawn and what we're going to agree or not agree about. But
Yeah.
we're a little far afield now. The tougher issue is what we as Americans want to do with these social media platforms that are in fact disseminating information that is false. And here we saw on January 6th, without these social media platforms, there would not have been an insurrection. There wouldn't have been people storming the Capitol. But it's a tough balance to make. And even as we stand here today, some of these platforms are being used for child sexual abuse, trying to obtain victims of crimes, underage victims that can be exploited. And the question is, how hard do we want to crack down on these? And these are things that are currently being debated. There have been many bills in Congress. We have conservatives like Josh Hawley who wanted to, for their own reasons, wanted to curtail some of these rights. And then we have liberals on the other side wanting to curtail these rights, or these, I should say, this immunity from these platforms that they're getting, because it's really a legal immunity that they're allowed. And, so it's a tough issue. It's a thorny issue. And I still believe there can be some tailored restrictions that aren't overbearing, that can be drawn up. And I've been discussing these with a number of people, and we'll see which way Congress goes. But it's a tough issue.
Yeah, and when we talked earlier, Phil, we talked about the show, The Future of Democracy, and it is troubling right now where we're at. And the question that we kind of kicked around when we talked was, what can we do as individuals to protect the democracy that we all feel like we deserve or we want?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there are things that every person can do. We shouldn't feel that we're powerless. And, I've taken one path, which was, to speak out. I started a Twitter account, which I'm much more conservative about now, because I think in some respects, Twitter brings out the worst in everybody. And it's because there is no real debate on it. So I've tried to be very cautious when using that platform. But I've also decided to write monthly op-eds for the papers so that I could talk out on a number of these issues that are important. But my real hero in this area, something that I think is more accessible to most people, is my wife. And my wife was very, very upset about the election. I mean, very upset, and has been for some time. And, was talking about, even though I think it was mostly fanciful, moving out of the country, because we have kids who live abroad. She was so upset with what she saw as the direction of the country. And she started working with Vote Save America, and she started writing, and she wrote thousands of letters. She wrote them to voters, registered voters, just to get them to go to the polls. She happened to adopt the state of Arizona, which was in play. So she spent so much time, money, and effort just writing these letters on her own. And she did something else that was even more distasteful to her, because she's kind of a shy person, but she started making phone calls and tried to talk to people. So she spent a lot of her time doing that. So right then, and plus she contributed money to a variety of platforms that she found was interesting. So she used her time, energy, and money in that area. I also think people can more and more, and this has come up in the last 2-3 weeks, especially with the Major League Baseball decision to boycott Georgia. Then Donald Trump and a number of conservatives went wild on Major League Baseball and Coke,
Coca-Cola.
Delta. It's okay for the right wing to talk about cancel culture on the left, which does exist. But when they're willing to cancel anybody on the right, whether it's Major League Baseball, whether it's football for people kneeling, whether it's an airline, whether it's Coca-Cola, if it's in their interests. But I do think that there is potential pressure that can be brought by corporations. So people who have the ability, whether it's to organize boycotts of products or simply write to people in corporations, or if nothing else, for example, people who live in South Carolina, they shouldn't hesitate to write the senators, to at least know, let them know how. Now, it might not do any good, I'll say that.
Yeah. So you told me something, because I asked you, I was like, so if I write to my Congress people, are they really looking at my letters? And you told me something that was a little unsettling.
They look at them. If they have staffers. I mean, again, the individual congressperson may not look at them, but their staffers will. They compile lists of these things. And many of them, one of the interesting facts I learned doing political corruption cases is that if you call up your Congress person to ask them for something, this can happen all the time. I'm not getting my Social Security checks, it could be as simple as that. Or, hey, I can't get into the local VA, hospital because of whatever reasons. It could be any of a number of complaints. I've got a kid abroad I'm trying to reach. Whatever your complaint is that a congressman can do. So you call up. There are a number of congressmen, and I know this for a fact, they look to see if you've donated,
Right.
So if you've donated, you might get your, oh yeah, certainly. Ms. Green, yeah, the congressman's very interested in that issue, and they may talk to you, they may pass you along, especially if you're a big donor. Believe me, if you're a big donor, you will get a conversation with the congressman, or congresswoman about that issue. So yes, they do look at these things. These things do matter. And you have to decide where. You're in a position, if you're in a very conservative state, where maybe it doesn't matter because of gerrymandering. And that's, that may be a topic for another time because it's a long one. But maybe you can't do any good in that state. You can't talk to your congressman. You can't talk to your senator. You may be able to do something positive on a local level, but not on a state level, but maybe not. Or you could always we have the opposite situation in California. We have in where we are, we have a Democratic Congress person we like. Our senators, are both Democrats, and we wanted to do something. At least my wife wanted to do something. So she adopted Arizona. So she's writing letters over there. Now, that's always something people can do. So the point is people have to stay involved, and they have to fight this. What am I going to do? I'm just one person. I can't do anything. There are steps that people can take, and it's so important that people, don't simply fade away, but they stay active, they stay committed, because if you want change, it's the only way you're going to get change. And right now, our democracy is on a knife's edge because of issues such as the Electoral College and gerrymandering. And we're in a situation where, are we even a democracy? I understand we're a representative form of government, but why is it that, over the last 25, 30 years, the one party has won the election in terms of the popular vote every time, but yet they've lost the presidency on several of those occasions. As a result of that, we have one party appointing Supreme Court justices, even though they've only had a majority, like for 1 4-year period in the last 20, There's something very disturbing about these things, and we need as a country to remain vigilant, and we as citizens have to try to do everything we can, which is the reason I'm on your show today.
Right. And I think that's our takeaway for today, is that everybody needs to stay involved. Everybody needs to recognize that your voice can make a difference in some way, with letters, with getting people registered to vote, to getting people to the polls. I think that's a really important takeaway for this.
Yeah. Apathy is our enemy.
Apathy is our enemy. Thank you. And this is, Phil, we could do several more shows, I think, and maybe over time we can do that. But I think we have to kind of wrap up for today. This has been great. Thank you so much. I want to share your Twitter feed with people. So if they use Twitter and they want to see who you are and what you're saying, it's at P.L.B.Halpern. So you can follow Phil there. And I wanted to thank our forest bathing sponsors, June Green and Don Blumenthal, and Drew Morgan. Thank you for helping us with that event. And then I wanted to take a minute to tell you about our guest for next week. So our guest for next week is Dr. Sarah Zeff Geber. She's a 2018 recipient of the Influencers in Aging designation by PBS Next Avenue. She's an author, a certified retirement coach, and a speaker on retirement and aging. Interestingly, Sarah has a niche specialty around solo aging, people who have no children or who are aging alone. This is not something that I really thought about much until I talked to Sarah, and she has a book called Essential Retirement Planning for Solo Agers. So I think she has a lot of important information in there. It's information that will help all of us, but certainly if you are in a position where you don't have children or you may not have a partner, things that you need to be thinking about going into the future. Phil, I always like to remind people of a quote from C.S. Lewis at the end of my show, and it is that you are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream.
Well, I'll try my best.
Thanks for joining us. Thank you all for joining. I know your time is valuable, and I appreciate that you joined our show today, and I look forward to seeing you all next week for another Hey Boomer. My name is Wendy Green. Thanks.